You ready? Okay. Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Warren County Board of Supervisors Tuesday, August 15th, 2023 meeting. It's 9:33 a.m. We're in the boardroom. I'd like to welcome everybody here. Please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any agenda deletions or additions at this point?
I think you've got a modification on the consent agenda.
Correct.
Yeah.
Do have that one. Okay, so the first item on our agenda today is the consent agenda. Are there any questions or concerns?
I would move the consent agenda with the modification on, which item is it that?
J.
With item J, which should read, changing the position for Chris Folan from elections clerk to clerk.
Okay.
And I would move the consent agenda as modified.
Okay, could I just make a quick correction on R, the public health navigator? It's an opioid reduction through prevention program.
Well, could you repeat that again, please?
Yes, it would be approved public health navigator opioid reduction through prevention program job description. We're just adding through prevention.
I'd accept that amendment.
Okay, thank you.
Change.
Okay, we have a motion and some amendments. Do we have a second, please?
I'll second.
Okay, roll call, please.
McIntyre?
Aye.
Snell?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye. So the consent agenda is approved. The second item on our agenda is a Norwalk City update from Luke Nelson. Luke Nelson's the city manager of Norwalk. Thanks for being here, Luke.
Thank you for having me. Let's see if I can make all this work here. Oh, good, you got it up. Excellent. All right, well, I've got a brief update, and then I'm going to go through a presentation that I did for our city council on assessments. I realize some of that, maybe the heat is gone down just a little bit on that, but it'll gear right back up as we get into budget season. I'm a little bit disappointed. This isn't nearly the crowd that was here the last time I was here for an update.
Yeah.
Oh, we're not disappointed. Sorry to disappoint you, but
Well, just a quick update. Overall permits are close to pre-pandemic levels. I've got a graph here on the next slide that kind of shows you some comparisons.
Okay.
Our commercial is running stronger for new development. Residential is a little bit slower, as you could imagine, with the higher interest rates. We're in that 200-ish at a rate of about 200 housing starts per year. Norwalk Central is booming. We've got the grocery store that's going in, the Fairway. Starbucks is being built, the Greg Young Sports Campus, which includes City State Bank Fieldhouse, which is a city facility, and then the Fairway Fields, those are the outdoor pods. And those have been so busy, you know, it's great to see that activity, but all of a sudden the parking lots aren't done, so all the people that are parking are on residential streets, so they're finding any grass lot they can find to park vehicles. So there's been a little bit of growing pains there. The neighbors might describe it a little bit more harshly than me. Also a Marriott hotel, and we just did the groundbreaking on that, and then a Hilton True. We anticipate that they will be doing some kind of a groundbreaking within the next month. And then there's several others that are right on the verge. One that we're hopeful within the next couple weeks will be an announcement. I think they're waiting for us to sign a concessions agreement with one entity so they can announce who this new restaurant is coming to town. So all real fun stuff. And then we have a large apartment complex that's in the application process right now. Norwalk, compared to our metro counterparts, we are very slow on high density housing. There's some good and bad to that. You can make decisions however you feel, but we tend to be a little bit slower than some of the others in the metro. I've got an image of what that apartment complex looks like coming up, and that's not been approved yet. We still have one more hearing left. And then last, the podcast series that we started. I thought it would be a great idea because it's hard to get out and be in all places all the time and provide information to people. So I said, let's start doing some YouTube videos, just like you're on Zoom, do a presentation. Our marketing specialist said, yeah, it's a good idea, but I think it would be better if they were podcasts. That frees people up more if they're mowing the lawn, if they're doing laundry, if they're doing whatever in their house, or even on the way to work, they can just listen to that podcast. Well, it turns out her idea was a lot better than mine. Since we've been doing that, that's been getting a lot of positive feedback. We just pick different subjects and sit down and record a 5 or 10 minute conversation. The one with the mayor and I think lasted a lot longer. But I sit down sometimes with somebody else, we just record it and we put it out there so people can learn more about what's happening in their local government and just how we do business.
Awesome.
Quick question for you on that. Is that on your city website, or how do you access that podcast?
It is on our city website, but I believe, and I haven't asked our marketing specialist specific details, but if you have a method that you go about listening to your podcast or adding them to your list, she identified to me recently that through Apple, if you use that as a source, you can add our website as a location, so it'll automatically show up when those new podcasts are there.
Okay.
But
Thank
yes,
you.
through our website would be the best place to go. So this is a graph that shows from 2020, which is the lowest one, up to current in 2023. You see through the pandemic that we had some real strong numbers. The key thing to note here is this is year to date as of August. So back in 2021, I think you remember me telling you that we topped over 300 new housing starts. Again, now in 2023, we're on track to be closer to that 200 number, which I have to say is not necessarily a bad thing. We were kind of operating at breakneck speed there for a while, so seeing things more at that modest level tends to be a little bit better. This is the apartment complex that is proposed. It's kind of hard to see, but down in this lower left-hand corner, it's proposed in that colonial circle that was, it's right next to, Unity Point that's adjacent. So this would be west of Highway 28. It's about 400 units. They're actually asking for an amendment. They want to add more units, but they want them, the additional units to be studio apartments, that they're seeing a need for a smaller space for a different clientele, not necessarily families, which on one hand kind of makes our school system happy because they get inundated with students with apartment complexes, but there's not necessarily the value to go along with it. So with those not one bedroom, with just a studio, you tend to see less families and more like a young professional crowd that's there.
Very good.
Luke, what's the rental range on a new, like what do people think for rental living? Have they established that yet, or can you ballpark it?
They did not estimate any of those numbers for us, at least not that I recall.
Okay.
Are they using Section 8 as part of this, or is this non-Section 8?
This is all market rate, and so I'm not aware that they're using any of those waiver systems, although it's my understanding if somebody can make up the difference from their waiver, essentially they could afford to go anywhere.
Yeah.
I just think there tends to be some limits in there, so Mark, I don't know the very specific answer to that. But I do know that these are market rate. And they're not looking for any incentives from the city, which is a reason to jump for joy. So this is where the presentation starts that we did with City Council. If you recall a little bit of history, the state legislature has really made an effort to try to lower property taxes, which it's kind of weird being a city manager, but I certainly tend to be more on that conservative side for government spending. Sometimes I feel out of place. So understanding what the state is trying to accomplish makes a lot of sense to me. I think it's a great goal to have. However, for me, what overrides that is how much I value local control. Mm-hmm. You folks and city councils, we are the closest form of government where people get to be right here and you are so accessible. So what I get frustrated with is when state legislature comes in and forces our hands to lower the levy. Part of the numbers I'm going to show you is we've been on track to lower our levy more than what they've identified. However, this new legislation is actually causing our council to take a step back and not lower the levy as much because of nervousness of what they're going to change in the future. So the system really gets out of balance when you have that state level coming in and forcing the hand of local officials. So then about that same time, they were having these discussions is when the new property assessments came out, which assessments went up. That's great. That means that the value in Iowa is so high across the state. All that is good until people see that property tax bill or the assumption that that assessment going up automatically means the property taxes go up, which isn't a direct relationship, but they are tied together. So we wanted to get in front of our council. Actually, we had one of our council members that specifically requested a work session about property assessments. So we thought we would do a quick 101. And it's really surprising how simplified this is. It's not that complex. Okay, so the presentation to them, we talked about the ground rules. This presentation is about Norwalk City property taxes only. It's not about county, it's not about school or township or any other taxes. It's just about Norwalk City property taxes. Seems strange, but in no way will this accurately predict what your property taxes are. The next slide really highlights that. Our focus is on residential property. Norwalk is 86% residential, so that tends to be our focus and topic of discussion. Not that multifamily or not that commercial isn't important, but it's just such a huge portion of our revenue comes from residential. The legislature could convene for a special session and change the rules tomorrow. What was funny is this day I did the presentation, I think it was right before they had reconvened or right after they had reconvened to make it was something with abortion. Yeah, yep. So it's entirely possible that they could do that, and what we say is happening today, it could change pretty rapidly. So the last thing, and this goes for you as well, just like with council, speak freely. If you got a question, please interrupt me. I enjoy the interruptions. So as part of this process, I went and sat down with Janet Bunce. I showed her the presentation, we went through it. Her response was, I like the presentation, but I'm concerned with the unknowns. One of the things that she specifically brought up, and there's a good visual here, she said that she was concerned about the homestead, seniors, and military tax credit, which was also part of the bill. And she said, Luke, look out that window, her office window, and there was a stack of papers about this high on her counter. And she said all of those are part of those tax credits. That could be a huge impact. Those are some of the unknowns. They hadn't ran all those, so they didn't have a firm answer on what that specific dollar figure was. The assessment appeals, just because the new assessments go out doesn't mean everybody is going to accept that. She noted specifically in Norwalk, we had an apartment complex that was pursuing an appeal that would bring their value down significantly by over, I want to say it was close to $2 million reduction they were asking for. And then finally the rollback. There are days it's like an enigma how that formula works. It's like they just plug a bunch of money, numbers into a black box and out spits what that rollback is going to be. Because the assessment's going up, you look across all the assessments across the state, and you remember several years ago there was that 3% max number that got included in that formula. Mm-hmm. So there's all these 3% maximum numbers, and it causes confusion. The 3% max associated with the rollback just has to do with how much residential values can go up. But because of that 3% max, this year we're operating in right now, the rollback is 54%. So if your home is valued at $100,000, you pay taxes on $54,000 of it, okay? Because of all the assessment increases in that rollback number, the expectations are that that rollback is going to go down to 47%. So you have a $100,000 home, you're only paying property taxes on $47,000. But because of the assessments, your $100,000 home is probably $150,000. So you see where things get a little bit wonky. So then 47% of $150,000 ends up being closer to $54,000.
Okay.
Anyway, the point of this is that there's a number of unknowns. So there are a lot of predictions included in this presentation that we did. The last thing, Janet said it's entirely possible the assessments might still be too low. We're still seeing, especially, I mean, what we see in our community, homes are still selling at a pretty high rate, even with those increased interest rates. So the next thing we said to council is what we need from them is we need a basic understanding, and we need them to give us some guidance as we move forward. All right, so how do the property assessments work? 3 basic items. Number 1, property is assessed by the county assessor. We don't have a city assessor, it's that one in our county that does all those assessments. So Janet and her team that go out and assess property. Assessments are based on market conditions. I don't pick out a number to see what a house is worth. None of you do. That is something that they are trained to look at how a home sells and what's inside the home, how many square feet, living space, all those items ultimately drive the market conditions that identify what a home is going to sell for. That's what those assessments are based on. The last thing is assessments must meet the 95% to 105% rule. And the best way to explain that is through a very simplified scenario. Because we were talking about Norwalk, this is the example I give. Let's say that Norwalk only has 10 homes. And all 10 homes are identically assessed at $300,000. In a given year, let's say that 2 of the homes sell for $350,000. That would be 117% of what the assessment was. Functionally, that means in the next year, all the homes, all 10 homes, would get reassessed at $350,000. It's just that easy. Just we have a lot more than 10 homes. So what impacts property assessments? Living space, land, and fixtures. I'm going to skip over the one that I have the big X to. Purchase price of other similar homes, the scenario we just gave. The purchase price that you pay for your home has an impact. And then ultimately your home improvements. If you do an addition on your home, if you remodel, if you finish your basement, all of those things are going to impact the assessment. What doesn't impact the assessment of your home are city councils and board of supervisors that spend money. That does not impact your assessment. But I do have this little caveat. Unless that mayor and council spend money to improve a community to the extent that it makes it more desirable, and then people are willing to spend more money to be in that community, driving up home prices. So there, arguably, indirectly, those decisions could make your assessment go up. But that's because people want to be in your community. So it seems like residential property is taking on more tax burden. Why is that? I think that is absolutely the case, and I've seen it in my over 20 years of working in local government. I've absolutely seen that shift towards more of a residential property tax burden. Number 1, because of the commercial rollback.
Yep.
Commercial property, if you had $100,000 commercial property, they paid taxes on $100,000. The state rolled that back by 10%, so now they now only pay on $90,000 of that $100,000 value. Multifamily residential, that was the big one. It was huge. They used to be commercially assessed. That was changed, and it was a phase-in over, I want to say it was 6 or 7 years, but we are now fully implemented that multifamily apartment complexes pay the same rollback as residential. So they went from, if you had $1 million apartment complex, they are now only paying on as if it was $500,000. Huge impact. I'd love to see somebody do a study, speaking of rental rates, to see if that reduction lowered the rental rates that people are paying in those apartments.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Not going to make claims one way or the other, but it would be a good study to do. The other important note that I bring up is low-density residential. That is our highest service demand at the lowest revenue. And the more low-density development you have in a community, which Norwalk fits that, it tends to become a more expensive place to live. I brought some baggage with me from the community I came from. When I came to Norwalk, I felt like more people were interested in lower cost of living. And over time, I've realized that Norwalk doesn't necessarily operate that way. They don't like paying property taxes, but at the same time, I think there's more of an understanding that with that higher expectation of services comes a realization that your tax bill is going to be a little higher. The last thing is residential values in the Des Moines metro area. I feel like we're so buffered from what happens on the coast. Our values have just continued to climb. People spend more on housing in Iowa, have been gradually spending more, and because of that, higher values, it means they're going to pick up higher portions of that tax bill. Okay, so last two slides. This is numbers heavy, but this is what we presented council with that really explained how House File 718 is going to impact our city. So over here we have fiscal year 24, the year that we're in currently, and our combined levy is $14.88, and that was a 20-cent reduction from the previous year. So we lowered almost a quarter. What's interesting, and I'll skip ahead, the reductions that are going to be required by this new legislation falls almost directly in line with what we have been doing as a city. Now, I realize not all cities are in the same situation to be able to do that, but that's what Norwalk has been doing. So the way that this works is you'll see where it says old in a couple spots, or new dollars before. I have Senate file, but it was actually House File 718, to compare and show the two numbers. So the amount of new dollars that we're going to see as a result of this legislation, we will get 1.7 million of new dollars in fiscal year 25. That is a huge number, and that is based on this 35% growth. That's not our actual growth. What's built into that 35% number is a few big things. Number one, the new assessments that took place. Those new assessments raise assessments up. The rollback later brings some of that down, but still there's a lot of new assessments. Number two, we are retiring TIF debt. That benefits us, that definitely benefits you folks as well. You see some dollars come back into your general fund. Same for us. We get some new dollars that come back into our general fund. That is, I'm going to say, roughly about half of that number, half of that 35%. The other portion of it is just our growth. And we've been seeing about 8 to 10% growth. I think even in fiscal year 26, where we're showing 8%, I think that's when we're going to see some of that residential boom come online, so it could be a little bit higher than that. But that 35% growth, that's not a typical thing that we'll see year to year. We anticipate that this 8 to 6% is probably more of a typical number for us. So looking at $1.7 million of new money, that is a huge number, but not typical. We're usually closer to the $500,000 range of new dollars. So before Senate File or House File 718, we would have received about 1.9 million. So essentially they're forcing our hand of about a 24-cent reduction. I would have estimated that had this legislation not come up, it's entirely possible that myself and our finance director would have been going to council with a potential $1 levy reduction. Part of the direction we got from council after this discussion is we have this legislature for another 3 to 4 years before we see any type of significant change. It's entirely possible that they're not done meddling with our local finances, which again, their heart's in the right place. It's a good goal to have. It's just hard to cast such a wide brush for all cities and counties across the state. Because of that unknown, our council has said, we do not want to lower that any more than we have to, because we're not sure what's coming up, and our citizens expect us to maintain service levels.
Yep.
So I'm not going to jump too much into these next few years, but you'll just see that the amount of new dollars that we'll see year over year is in that $250,000 to upwards of $300,000 range, compared to the $500,000 or $600,000 we would be receiving. Year over year, you might think, oh, 250,000, maybe that's not terrible. Although by the time you look at year 5, all of a sudden, that is a total impact on our budget of over $1.2 million. So it becomes pretty severe.
When you go back and you compare the new dollars before and the new dollars after, what are the factors that you're using to get to that number or that differential between those two numbers? How are you calculating that?
Well, first of all, we're assuming that we would have kept the 810 levy. We're assuming that all of our debt service, all of our other levies would have stayed the exact same. And then we use a basic 50% rollback formula and some assumption that the assessments aren't going to go up significant or come down significantly. Does that make sense?
It does.
Now, what I don't do in here is
I think the thing that I'm not clear on is with the 718 legislation, what is the limit that they're putting in that takes you down to that 1.7 number instead of the 1.9? How did that force that to go down? Was it because there's a 3% or some other number that's
yes,
in
so
there?
the 718, it's a two-part formula, which is what confused a lot of people, including myself. I geek out on this stuff, and so does our finance director, so we spent a lot of time digging in and creating formulas. We sent it off to the Department of Management. Our formula is correct. There were some finance directors in the Metro that just stood back and said, we are not even going to attempt to understand this legislation. We're going to wait for the state to come in and explain it to us. Well, we've since gotten down that path, and we've been assured that our formulas are correct. It's a two-part formula. It used to be that whatever your new valuation is, you just take that number and you multiply it by whatever you think you need for a levy, and that spits out the amount of dollars that you're going to receive. In the future, it's now a two-part formula where they come in and they inject this 3% maximum. So they look at what your growth is from one year to the next, and they take a 3% attachment to that new valuation. That spits out a number, and then you look back at what your levy was in the previous year and do another calculation to spit out what your new levy can be. And then you take that new levy and multiply it by what your total valuation is.
Wow.
I get a headache talking about it. So the key part is it's still healthy for a community to grow. For a while, they talked about just capping people at a 3%.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I was afraid of.
Yes, and this legislation even had a few people fooled into thinking that was the case because there was still this 3% cap terminology. Well, there is a 3% cap, but that 3% is only one part of the formula.
Right,
You
on the
still get
levy.
to multiply your new levy by your total valuation. The best way I can explain it to oversimplify the whole system, and it's after going through and looking at all these formulas, kind of predicting what's going to happen, whatever your revenues were going to be, it comes in, and if you grew at 6% or more, it shaves off the top 3%. Which it just happens to be for Norwalk, that we typically grow in that 6 to 8% range. We're one of the communities that would be the most severely impacted.
Wow.
And by inclusion, Warren County will be impacted the
Yep.
same way.
Right.
However Norwalk is impacted, we will be impacted as a county.
Right. Now, some of the other cities, I'm not sure on Indianola and Carlisle specifically, but I believe their growth rate has been a little bit lower. If you're from 0 to 3% growth, you're held harmless.
Wash out.
Yep, you wash out. If you're 3 to 6%, then it's a 2% max that they roll off.
Okay.
But if you're right at somewhere between that 6 and 7% range, that's the most severely impacted.
Wow.
So then we went to council and we had all these yellow highlighted areas and we said, okay, these are all the variable numbers. The top yellow line is us coming in saying, what do we need? So if we're going to have 34 or 35% growth, and we say we're going to need that 34 or 35% growth.
Before you get into that, just a moment, because the 34% number is an important number here, because that was related to the TIF. So how do TIF districts fit with all of the stuff that you're talking about? Because that's the outlier situation compared to everything that you're talking about in terms of the trend line. So help me to understand where the TIF, either do we get to realize the full benefits of the TIF going into the future, or are we penalized for now having all this added growth come into the...
I won't attempt to predict the future, but as of today, TIF is also held harmless. So if you retire TIF, all those new revenues that come on board, you get to realize all those new revenues minus that 3%.
Glad to hear that.
Now, it's entirely possible the state legislature comes in and starts fiddling with the TIF legislation as well, which, there's good and bad in that. That's how we provide incentives. If the state believes that we can continue to grow the state without those incentives, great. That's okay. I get a little bit concerned about that from what we hear from private business and what they need to help make things work within the state, and how much easier it is for them to have incentives those first few years out of the gate, which is what we tend to focus on. But it's entirely possible they could change that. As of now, TIF is unaffected. Again, minus that top 3%.
Were your hotels and your new restaurant and a lot of the commercial growth that that you're developing up in Norwalk, are those TIF projects?
Yes, most of them are.
See, that's a good indicator, isn't it? Like, you know, even for Marriott hotels and these big corporations, they're going to places that offer these incremental financing deals, I believe. When we take that off the table, Marriott may decide to build in Illinois or Minnesota, or, you know, to grow and expand in places where there are tax incentives. And, you know, it's difficult to come up with, even for Marriott, you know, $10 million or $20 million to kick off a project. You know, that's not you know, it's easier for Marriott, but it's not necessarily something that they want to change their whole corporate program to start putting this capital into these projects when they haven't had to do that. So I think this is a huge issue,
Yeah.
how we handle TIF projects and how we execute those projects. I think we need to offer those to these companies to keep our growth moving, my opinion.
And I think the key word that you said is kickoff. When they're initially starting a project, that's what we continually hear. It's those first few years of getting rolling that are the most challenging.
Absolutely.
And for the hotel projects, that's where we're trying to help them the most, is in those first years.
Thank you.
So we plugged in up here to say, council, hey, if you don't think that you need the 34%, we can lower that number. And when you lower that number, it has a direct impact on the amount of property taxes that somebody would pay. This gray area here essentially utilizes this 1.7 of new money. So when I brought up earlier that 1.7 million of new dollars that in later years goes down significantly to like 350, right here is really the core basics. If I were to say to an average citizen, if you want to watch what's happening in your local government, I would just look at these numbers. Operationally, staff, we're probably 80 to 85% staff. I mean, that's most of what local government is. From there's operations and equipment. And again, these are new dollars in a given year. This isn't the total budget. If we have to add new staff, we just approved 2 new police officers and converting 3 part-time firefighters to full-time. Those are big expenses. And it leaves a balance here of $850,000. Our concept, or council, what the direction they give us is that they want to capitalize on those full dollars because they don't know what's going to happen over those next 4 or 5 years. So if we take as many of those dollars as we can and utilize them over the next 4 years to balance out any other decreases that would be required by the state government. And what that shows is by the end of that time period, we would have about $315,000 left in that balance. I'll tell you right now that based on some of the requests I'm seeing from staff, these numbers that I plugged in, $100,000 a year, that doesn't get it done. Based on our growth rate and what we're seeing for demand and services, 1 new or 2 employees at a total of $100,000 a year does not get us there. So just focusing on fiscal year 25, we came down here and we said, okay, well, if the average home assessment value went up by 22%, and that person was in a $350,000 home, their new assessment takes them to $427,000. The rollback at 47%, this is the amount of tax they would pay on an annual basis to the city. We're only talking the city portion. The increase in their tax would be 4.5%. I will tell you that the recommendation that myself and our finance director took to council, we plugged in one number and then worked backwards. We plugged in 3% right here. Meaning we didn't want to see that person in a $350,000 home have the property taxes they pay go up by more than 3%. But council had some really good points, knowing what they want to accomplish in the city, also recognizing that being a low-cost community isn't necessarily the top priority. They certainly want to be, they want to manage those dollars well, but they want to make sure that we're providing the amenities and services that the citizens demand. That is their top priority. So they decided that that additional 1.5% would be acceptable. What's kind of interesting is when you look at what that dollar actually means. My cup of coffee from Come and Go is $2. I don't get anything fancy, but if I took my wife out to Mahalo's and got 2 nice, fun cups of coffee, it would be about 10 or 12 bucks. The monthly impact from this increase we're talking about, it's about $10.50. That's per month, just for the city portion. When you get right down to it, they're not big numbers for that individual property owner back and forth. And again, these are assuming that you're in a $350,000 home. Now, as we jump out into later years where things are harder to predict, we see some situations where they would actually see some declines. And this is, again, assuming a lot that the rollback doesn't change and assessments don't go up by more, or somebody doesn't add on to their home. This area that I grayed out here, this was assuming that council would say, yep, we like that recommendation of the 3%. We would only be taking 23% of the available 35% growth. And what I did is I ran the numbers for a bunch of people in the community, a bunch of our elected officials, myself included. So here's mine. Mine would have increased $76 annually. But for me, the big number is we built our home 6 years ago. Yeah, 6 years ago. So our abatement ends. So the big difference for us is that abatement, which just so happens, a lot of people think that's a big number. Even that over the course of a year, our abatement isn't an earth-shattering number. Per year, it's in that $600 range. One of the gentlemen that's in Rotary with me, they just purchased a new home. So the amount of taxes that they've been paying over the last year into this year, their assessment is set. There was no change in their assessment. So because of this change of a 20 to 25% reduction, they're actually seeing a significant decrease. We had one person, was an old council member. He likes to have really fun, heated debates with me. I don't think he lives too far from you, Mark.
Probably right.
Great guy. Well, his assessment actually went up by over 30%. It's one of the biggest that I saw. So for them, it's about $16 a month. Again, this is assuming that 23%, so it would be a little bit higher than that. So I grade that out because it kind of doesn't apply. Those numbers aren't direct. But it's always nice to take these actual people, the actual taxes they're paying, and show them what that looks like. And that's it.
It's like, what happened?
Sorry, that took certainly longer than I thought it would.
That was really informative. Thank you.
I enjoy being able to come and chat with you guys and give these updates. I'll certainly try to keep them short in the future. I think that's a really important topic to have some detail. I think the more citizens that understand some of this helps them maybe not be as frustrated as they could be when they see that property tax bill, or just to understand where their dollars are going.
One of the other things, I was at the community chat on Saturday with some of our city leaders up there in Norwalk, and issue of census came up. What are the plans for City of Norwalk? Because I've heard you mention that the City of Norwalk now has a population over 15,000. So it was stated that there's going to be a special census of some sort. Is that correct?
That is correct. We hope to kick that off early January 2024. It's going to cost over $400,000 to have this special assessment done. What's interesting is the way we receive certain amount of revenues, like road use tax, which you get a form of that, there's a big portion of that formula that is based on population. Just road use tax alone Once we capitalize on the additional population we've had, again, keep in mind, this is a 2020 census. So we're getting close by the time we get this, that's 4 years, 5 years later, 5 years of growth. And we predict that within a year and a half, we would make up that $400,000 just in road use tax alone. Local option sales tax. This isn't as much of a benefit for you folks because it helps Norwalk, and you know the formula for local option sales tax gets divided among everybody in the county. But that one also, our local option sales tax would likely go up with a higher population number. So those are just two, and we quickly found that that $400,000 would be overcome quite swiftly just by those two additional revenue sources. So we took that to council and they said, yep, this makes sense. Let's make the investment and do the special census.
I hadn't thought about this until just this moment. Thinking about, okay, if Norwalk's population is growing, that directly impacts us here in the county too, because our total county population will have to be adjusted accordingly as well.
I would sure think that is the case. That might not be a bad idea to have somebody call census and just say, hey, if Norwalk does a special census, how does that impact us? The people at the Census Bureau have been very helpful for us. That might just be a simple phone call just to make sure that that is the case.
Because if that is the case, then county potentially could receive some benefit as well, road use tax fund, whatever it might be, that's population sensitive.
Yep.
I hadn't thought about that.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that either. Sometimes I
just
get.
as you were saying that, I was like, ooh, I wonder what happens if Norwalk's growing and that special census happens, or if any other community was to do the same sort of thing. That is going to have an impact on us here at the county, because you would think our county population as a whole would be changing then accordingly.
Right. Any other questions for me?
Not for me, just a
thank you.
great appreciation for being here, and this is really informative, and
Excellent.
thank you so much.
I appreciate the feedback.
Thank you, Luke.
Thanks, Luke.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is to consider the application for the use of Warren County Justice Center grounds for Summer Nights Live on August 26, 2023, with possible action.
I would move approval of the application as presented to us.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
McIntyre,
Aye.
Snell,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye. So that application is approved. Next item on our agenda is to consider the approval of the federal aid agreement for a county highway bridge program for project number BROS-C091, Parent 140, 8J-91, with Iowa Department of Transportation, and authorize board chair to sign with possible action.
This is just a standard federal aid agreement that we go into with the state when we have a federal aid project. It's for the bridge on 180th south of G76. That the next project we're going to be letting. There's nothing special in the agreement, just we have to follow Iowa DOT letting procedures and project administration. It lays out what is eligible for federal funds and what isn't.
I would move approval of the federal aid agreement for County Highway Bridge Program for project number BROS-C091, Pren's 140, Pren's 8J-91.
Second?
Roll call, please.
okay. McIntyre,
Aye.
Snell,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye. That agreement is approved. The next item on the agenda is to consider the approval of Mid-Iowa Planning Alliance for Community Development, MIPA membership, with possible action.
Well, as we talked about in our work session, I think there's benefits to come with this very readily. So I would move approval of the Mid-Iowa Planning Alliance for Community Development membership as presented in the invoice that we received.
Second?
Roll call, please.
McIntyre,
Aye.
Snell,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye. Motion is approved. Okay, item number 7 is a discussion of compensation for...
Six.
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay.
Okay, item number 6 is to consider the approval of entrance variance application as submitted by Macklin Acres LLC with possible action. Good morning. How are you today? Good. Name and address, please.
Glenn Salo, 16896 65th Avenue, St. Charles, Iowa. But did Michaela attach the photos of this?
Yes, we do have the photos here in our packet.
Okay. So in speaking with Tim, the engineer, this property has 2 addresses and 2 different existing driveway locations. The north one is the one that it was actually Dave Carroll I was working with, and then it fell back to Tim. Both driveways have an equal sight distance limitation.
Okay.
The problem that the county doesn't factor in when they issue driveways is that if you're off the driveway more than 5 to 10 feet, they have a protocol, they're within so many feet of the shoulder. The south driveway actually sits higher above the road. The north driveway, the one that they issued the permit to, that they agreed to, sits lower. So I don't know if she gave you these photos, but there are 2 additional pictures here that represent, if you wanted to look at these, that represent the north driveway where it's
Yeah, we
currently
have
at.
2.
Well, I think he's got
Got
additional
another
ones.
one? Yes, okay. Thank you very much. There you are, Crystal.
Yeah, there's a hill there.
And the other thing that the north driveway has against it is it's actually coming down a hill versus the south driveway. They're coming up a hill, any oncoming
I see
traffic,
3
so.
different pictures here. Could you repeat that, please?
I said the other thing that the issue that we didn't like on the north driveway was the traffic is coming down the hill toward you. Where the sight distance is limited, it's down a hill. Historically cars travel faster going down a hill versus coming up a hill, which is what the south driveway has.
Okay.
And what we wanted to do was switch it back to the south driveway. And in talking to Tim, he didn't have any objections to it. He said, just fill out a variance, take it to the supervisors. Yeah.
Okay.
So
All
that's where
right.
we sit today.
Tim, do you want to comment on this? Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was with David when we first denied it. He's got about 3/4 of a mile of road frontage. Well, he didn't want to build where it works, and I understand that because it's a very rolling terrain. He wanted to build up on top of the hill. We did approve a location because it was an existing entrance that was addressed, so it was grandfathered in. So David felt comfortable approving that one, even though it didn't meet sight distance. Anything that doesn't meet the sight distance in the ordinance, we won't approve. He is correct, they both have similar sight distance, it's a similar situation. We don't object to approving this variance. I know some of them there's better locations they can choose, they just don't want to. This one, it's equal, so we don't have any objection to it. But like I
Okay.
said, it doesn't meet the ordinance, so it needs to go through you guys.
So are we providing a variance for both driveways or just the higher, or the lower driveway?
Just the one that we wouldn't address, that's where he wants the address.
Okay. Okay.
It'll be switched from where it was approved first, that address will be removed, and then it'll be put on this new one if you guys approve it.
Okay.
No objections from the engineering department on this?
We don't.
Okay. Any other questions from the Board of Supervisors?
No.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion, or I'll make one.
Okay. I'll make a motion to approve the entrance variance application as submitted by Macklin Acres LLC.
Second, roll call, please.
McIntyre?
Aye.
Snell?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye. That variance is approved. Thank you for being here. The next item on our agenda today is a discussion of compensation for independent contractor Peggy Rice with possible action.
I really don't have any objections to this because this is really one of those things that's very similar to what we do all throughout the county presently. So it's just, to me, it's kind of pro forma type deal. We should go ahead and approve this. It's no different than what we do with MSA or Schneider or any of these other folks that are hired by the county on temporary work. So I would move approval of the independent contractor agreement as presented.
Just one quick comment. This has an effective date, but not an end date. And I'm just wondering if you would have interest in including an end date on this. And, I mean, as this particular agreement, because otherwise it's just open-ended.
I see, okay.
It would be through like
Do the special election?
the canvas is when I think.
I would do it through the end of the year. I mean, if that's necessary. I don't know that that's really necessary, because independent contractor like this, you would typically take, it's like ramping up needs. You'd ramp them up when you need them, and you'd ramp it down when you don't need it.
Right.
So I don't know that I really think that's necessary.
Can I just add some input?
Yes.
I think David was looking at doing, having Peggy just help out through the 6th. So I don't know if we need to extend it through the end of the year. I guess that'd be a question for him, but I think we're only looking at September 6th, maybe the 7th.
Okay.
Well, he can always do another agreement if he needs to.
Well, that's
Okay.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, if we need to put in a date on it, I would amend the contract to indicate a termination date on this contract of September 6th.
Okay, second.
That's a motion?
Yes?
Okay. To approve the independent contractor agreement with the end date of September 6, 2024.
Yes.
And you second that motion?
Yes.
Okay, roll call, please.
McIntyre.
Aye.
Snell.
Aye.
Peter.
Aye. That motion is approved. Next item on our agenda are budget reports. Good morning, Megan.
Good morning. All right, so we are the first month through fiscal year 2024. So that puts us at about 8.33% through the year. The accounts that we're currently watching, because they're running a bit over that number, would be nutrition. I have spoken to Marty and discussed that we will probably need to do another transfer sometime soon, possibly before we can get it on an amendment and then put it on the amendment after we do the transfer. The other would be townships, and that is caused by some increase in paying wages. There were some townships that submit chunks of their hours at a time, so there are some fiscal year 23 hours that got paid in fiscal year 24. And then finally, general services. That one's running a bit high because we paid for our audit expense, which is a one-time expense. So that got paid up front, and that is a pretty good chunk of that budget, so that's why that one's running a little bit high. Overall, we are at 5.58% through our budget, so we're looking pretty good when you take into account the 8.33% is how far we are through the year. So if we look next at revenues, and the ones that are running a little bit below would be the auditor, but that would be election revenue timing. We haven't received any sort of election revenue in July, which is normal. And then Department of Human Services and DCAP both, it's just the timing of the state payments when they reimburse the county for the expenses. The engineer department, we haven't had a road transfer yet due to the apportioning timing, and no road use taxes were receipted into July. They got receipted into August, so that's just causing that to be low. Wellness, it's just the timing of when we do the transfer, so that's expected for it to be low at this point. And then non-departmental is kind of the same thing. It's a timing. We don't get the property taxes first installment received until September. So our revenues overall do look kind of low, but again, property taxes would have a large effect on that. And then finally, if we're looking at the fund balances overall, as we discussed, the nutrition would be the biggest decrease that you're seeing there. That's going to need that transfer. Otherwise, large decreases are all expected because they are in our capital project funds. So again, as we complete the projects, obviously we spend down those funds. Any questions?
This is wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you.
Okay, that concludes the budget report. The next item on our agenda is receive and file reports.
I'll make a motion to accept general assistance and the recorder's reports.
Second.
Roll call, please.
McIntyre?
Aye.
Snell?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye. Those reports are received and filed. The next item on our agenda is the supervisor's report. I'm going to elect to pass today on my report, just to mention to the public that we will be out in Madison County today, thanks to Supervisor McIntyre's work. I'm looking forward to that. We're looking at their EMS system and meeting some of their people involved and trying to learn more about just EMS in general. So that's my report.
I really don't have anything new to report since the last time, because the meetings that most of the groups that I participate with outside of this table are on summer break. So we won't have anything to report now for another month. There's a little bit of activity over in the MPO area, but nothing that's that I can report at this time. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to forego my my duties, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about the opioid task force. We have law enforcement, mental health, public health, and the county attorney sitting on this task force. It is just for Warren County, and we are using funds from the settlement funds, which are at about $250,000 right now. Over the next 5 to 7 years, we should receive up to $1 million. We are looking at our needs and the data that is showing us where we should focus. And I should have more to come with this. As of today's agenda, we did approve the hiring of the health navigator, which right now will report to the Board of Supervisors, but once the Board of Health is able to convene and they approve, then hopefully that will fall under the public health. So as of right now, that's where we're at, so thank you.
Has this job been posted yet?
I think that we were just waiting on approval from us, and then it can go out to the public for about
Okay.
10 days.
Okay.
Yep,
Good report. Thank you very much.
yeah.
The next item on our agenda is the public input section of our meeting. Is there anybody from the public that would like to talk to the Board of Supervisors?
Everybody's gone.
Okay, our next meeting date is September 5th, 2023 at 9:30 a.m. If there's no further discussion, I'll make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Second?
Roll call, please.
McIntyre?
Aye.
Snell?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.